Right here.
Victoria, when you say meetings, do you mean like these kinds of meetings, or do you mean of the Elder Abuse Task Force? Which kind of meetings?
Well, I am under the impression, excuse me, I am under the impression that you're out to try to find out information about the corruption. But I've not heard you talk about the actual corruption that goes on in the courts. And 90% of the abuse, the elder abuse, is through the courts. The judges are the criminals, and the attorneys that are appointed through your office, and it's like a tier. They are the co-conspirators. I want to know what you're going to do about the 4 attorneys that you just terminated, because now they're running around in all the courts and they're abusing, and they don't have to report back to you, and the judges and them are going to retaliate against the people that have asked them to be removed because they've committed criminal activity.
Let me address that. So that's one of the reasons why we really need to work, obviously, with the Supreme Court, because they oversee all the other courts. Now, I want to make it, understood that it's very important that if you think that there is an issue with the judge, sorry,
we can't hear
okay.
you back
If you think there's an issue with the judge and you think the judge has acted improperly, you do need to make a report to the Judicial Tenure Commission. If you have an attorney that you think has acted improperly, you need to make a report to the Attorney Grievance Commission. And I can guarantee nothing will happen if you don't make those reports.
But they're corrupt as well.
But, okay, all I can say is I know that between the JTC and the AGC, they are working harder on these cases than I've ever seen in the past. And there are repercussions to attorneys and to judges that don't follow the rules. And I will say, we have a new Supreme Court right now, right? Things have changed. We have a new chief judge. She is very active. She is very involved. And all I can say is you have to give these systems a chance to work. I know that it's frustrating. And I know that it's very, very upsetting. But please know that there are people out there in my office, there are people on the Supreme Court that do care deeply, and we are working on these issues. And a lot of it has to do with statistic keeping. So that's part of what the Supreme Court's doing too. They're trying to keep track and to say, well, is there a particular judge that seems to be granting a lot more of these full guardianships than some of their colleagues that maybe sit on the exact same court with them. So these investigations are ongoing, but sometimes they take time.
Well, what about the attorneys that you just terminated? Because they're running around now and retaliating. I know for a fact that Frazier has sold his house, so nobody can go after him for their assets that he stole from them. And he is over my case as well, and so is Judge Callahan with her FBI husband. And they're all in cahoots together, folks. This is all about taking care of their needs. How many people here have been harmed by the courts and the attorneys?
How many people what?
She tells us in her little speeches that she doesn't know anything about that, and that why should she prosecute them because you're not going to get your stuff back. That's absurd.
I certainly did not say why should
Well,
I
I heard it on a tape.
Get your stuff back. What I said is I would rather ensure that you don't lose your money at all rather than prosecute. We prosecute these cases all the time. Kristen, you want to talk about how many cases in your division alone we have pending right now that are those types of cases?
Absolutely. So when you talk about that, so there are attorneys that are appointed as public administrators.
Correct.
Sometimes those attorneys are also appointed as conservators or guardians by the court in which they are serving.
Yes.
The Attorney General's office does supervise public administrators in their public administrator capacity. It does not supervise attorneys that are acting as conservators and guardians outside of their public administrator
But they need to get involved because you know what? It's rampant throughout the court.
If you
It's
have
rampant
concerns
throughout the
about a
court.
particular
Instead of being
individual-
on the road touring and getting advice, I'd have my team in the courts there checking out what the attorneys and these judges are doing because they're stealing us blind, and you're not for the residents here of Michigan. That's obvious. It's absurd what's going on here. We work our entire lives. Our parents leave our inheritance for the courts. And you don't want to know something, folks? You only need one nefarious person here to go into court, a brother or sister, and then they go in, and the judge goes, well, you're fighting. So then they appoint Frazier or somebody else, and they go in and they run the meter. And the judges are in cahoots with them. They're the criminals, because if we didn't have the judges involved, they wouldn't get our assets. Our assets.
What's difficult is when people are going forward and making these grievances, and they are filing, we're doing everything that you're telling us to do, and we do it because we think we believe we have hope, because we are told to do this, and the response that is returned is that everything's okay, there's nothing here.
Well, it's a win-win.
Wait,
It's a win-win.
There's a video of Judge O'Brien in Oakland County, where one of the women who is fighting for just information and what is required to give to her by the courts, and what does he do when she files a grievance? He put her in jail. She was in jail
Jody
for
White.
summer. Jody White. So these are the things, and I understand it's so hard for you, and I applaud you for being here, because there's so much anger and frustration because we're just trying to protect our families. And for you to come and talk about legislation sounds great, but when you are boots on the ground in the court and they're not following the written law as is, legislation means nothing. And when you're afraid to stand up, my girlfriend's mom and her father were just died under guardianship. This is 2 weeks ago, Sandra Hines. I'm sure she's all over the place because she was removed as a guardian after 9 years of caring for her family because a rehabilitation director didn't want her to take her mom home. So for a year and a half, she's not seen her mom, and she died 2 weeks ago, and her dad died last week.
I understand, if I may, I will say this, I understand your frustrations and your anger and your concern, and that's why we're trying to do all this. These initiatives, you can't say that these initiatives don't matter.
Can
and are
I
not
send you
gonna
a
make
video of
any
Judge O'Brien removing her?
She has that.
We're asking
She
you-
has that.
We're asking you to
But
go
I
to
am-
these judges and remove them. That's what's gonna make the difference.
Ladies, first of all, I don't have the power to remove a judge.
Who
So
does?
just so you
How do
know.
we do that?
That is something that the Supreme Court has jurisdiction
How
over.
do we do that?
And also, by the way, the voters of the
How do we
county
do
you're
that?
talking about. How do you vote in
How
an
do-
election?
no,
It's
criminal.
I don't vote.
Criminal.
How do you start that
Arrest
process?
them.
Because that's what needs to happen.
If you have questions about how to remove a judge, I'm sorry for interrupting, but you can reach out to Rep. Cherry's office. I will be more than happy to help and walk you through the process. But just because we do have other questions and other folks, if we could limit talking to 3 minutes.
You know what, everybody, after it's done, meet us out in the parking lot. We have a lot to share with you.
Also that.
That's how things get done though, and you know that.
Okay. You know what, my response is gonna be this. I have been in this office for 9 months, and I am trying my hardest to do everything that I possibly can to make a difference in this area. This is not the only area that my office oversees. My department represents every single state agency and state board in the state of Michigan, and that includes representing, of course, the governor and the Secretary of State. We have jurisdiction over hundreds and hundreds of different areas. I recognize that this is an important issue. I've tried to prioritize it. We are working as hard as we possibly can, and we're doing things in that office. Quite frankly, we've never intervened in these probate court matters, I think, in the history of the AG's office, and we are trying to do that. We have brought, dozens of these cases, most of which have never been brought before, and we are trying to do everything we can. We're also in a situation, and Representative Cherry can tell you about this, where we're facing massive budget cuts to our office. So we're an office that, to begin with, only has about, 280 attorneys, and our office might be less than that now, maybe 270.
Let us help you with
And
research.
we are looking at losing 30 to 50 attorneys in October because the legislature, quite honestly, doesn't care for me because they're, a Republican legislature and I'm a
Not
Democrat.
everybody in the legislature.
Okay, but my point is, we are trying our hardest with the resources that we have, and we are trying to make a difference. But you also gotta give me a little bit of time here. In 9 months, I think we've done quite a lot, and if we can get this legislation through, I think that's going to be very impactful in a lot of cases. But, and I understand your frustration, because you've been dealing with this for years, but I've only been in that office for 9 months. So, give me a chance to get out there and try to make a difference.
We are grateful.